Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the latest mission from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Will Robinson Smith will be providing our commentary for the duration of this coverage. We're broadcasting from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. It has been quite some time since we've been with you for live launch coverage. In fact, we were just talking before this stream, Stephen Young and I, about the last time we had a pause this long. You have to go all the way back to April to get a pause between SpaceX missions of back then it was little over 12 days. We're just a little under 12 days with the launch of this mission. If it goes up on time, it will have been 11 days, 22 hours, 52 minutes, and 30 seconds since the last launch. So quite a long pause in SpaceX time. So we are very glad to be with you this evening. The aforementioned Stephen Young is running the technical aspects of our broadcast this evening. Adam Bernstein has the evening off. Michael Kane stepping in, doing double duty, doing some launch photography for us tonight, as well as providing some tracking views. And as always, if you're not following them on their social channels, these are their handles on X. See Adam in the middle, Michael on the right. They always do some excellent launch photography as well as other things. So be sure to keep up with all their activities there on social media. At the center of your screen, of course, is SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket, looking to launch this time and not be scuttled by weather again. Taking a look at the heart of Space Launch Complex 40, otherwise known as 640. SpaceX going for another crack at the Starlink Group 6-34 mission. Once again, this is poised to be the 41st dedicated mission launching SpaceX's upgraded Starlink V2 mini satellites. Currently, the T0 liftoff time is 11:01 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. For our viewers joining from around the world, that's 04:01 UTC. There's lots of great ways to help support what we do here at Spaceflight Now. First off, just being here with us on a Monday evening. Really appreciate the nearly 2,000 of you who have joined us and are spending a little time with us tonight. But naturally, we can't do these broadcasts without the wonderful support of our channel members. And right at the top, for those who may have been hopping in the live chat early, we have some very nice channel members helping to share the wealth with the gift of channel membership. So before we go any further, I want to give big kudos to 3 of our channel members. Mark Otto for gifting 10 Spaceflight Now memberships. Went out to YT Control Auditors, Roberto Cruz, Ozzy Osby, Liz, Big City, President Shelley, Rick Schweitzer, Erica Peach, Darren Pankey, and Pets Doc. So to all those who were gifted a channel membership by Mark Otto, be sure to thank him in the live chat if you haven't already. And big ups to you, Mark. Really appreciate that, sir. Scrolling on down, one of our wonderful channel members, Callistia Lee, also giving 10 Spaceflight Now memberships. Those going to Mr. 13, Fayette Percy, Tim Valentine, Charlie Charnock 2003, Independent Unity Reacts, Cheers GXP, Titus Kitchen, Brian Printer, John Nunn, and Did You Eat Dinner? The answer to that for me is not yet, but hopefully soon. Those all got channel memberships from Callistia Lee. So again, if you haven't already, be sure to give her flowers for helping to support our coverage here at Spaceflight Now. And last but certainly not least, I believe this came in just a few moments ago, the Zymeister or Zimister, not quite sure how you pronounce it, but really appreciate the gift of 20 Spaceflight Now memberships. So thank you, the Zimister. Those going to Count to Money. Love that. Pat Flint, Miles High, Christine Hurt, Carmen Sandiego. Well, we know where in the world she is now. Crazy Check, Ali French, MDM, Mark W. 1063, Cheryl Seifstein, J9 Wheels, Jason Winter, Bruce Barclay, Ian Oppenheim, Andrew Champanile, Peter Wood, Stellar Outdoors, William Horneman, and Renee Miro Savage, and Jim Pickett, all getting channel memberships courtesy of the Zemeister. So to the Zemeister, to Callistia Lee and Mark Otto, really appreciate the generosity and helping us do what we do here at Spaceflight Now. We are, as I mentioned, powered by channel membership. And so really appreciate that. Channel membership, of course, comes with the perks of getting our launches from the Cape here in 4K, as well as member-only videos and discounts at our online shop, shop.spaceflightnow.com. Good time of the year to peruse the online shop, get something for the space fan in your life. And last but not least, you can also use the YouTube Super Chat feature if you'd like to join in the conversation, ask some questions, or leave a comment. And if it's appropriate to be read on the show, we'd love to bring you into the conversation this evening. You not only give us interesting things to talk about, but also help power Spaceflight Now. And with all that housekeeping out of the way, again, welcome to our live coverage tonight. We are at T-minus 54 minutes, 3 seconds and counting. Less than 20 minutes away from the point at which the launch director gives their go for the startup propellant load for tonight's launch. If you happen to have not been with us for a recent launch, just as a reminder, SpaceX not providing mission audio ahead of the final 5 minutes of the count. So we will rely on our extensive coverage in Falcon 9 missions to guide you through the count, talk about some of the visual cues that we are watching to let us know things are likely on track. SpaceX, as always, is running their countdown from its Hangar X site here at the NASA's Kennedy Space Center. It's a facility where they refurbish Falcon boosters and prepare them for future flights, as is the case with the booster getting ready to fly this evening. SpaceX also has support for this launch in part from the control room at their headquarters in Hawthorne, California. Again, tonight's launch is targeting a T0 liftoff at 11:01 p.m. Eastern. That's 04:01 UTC. They do have multiple backup opportunities overnight until 2:59 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if for some reason a launch tonight is just not on the cards, and we'll get to why that may be insofar as the weather is concerned, SpaceX also has additional backup opportunities during a window that opens tomorrow evening at 11:16 p.m. Eastern. Do want to thank, before we get to the weather, Callistia Lee coming in again with some support for Spaceflight Now with a $10 super chat. Says, we love spreading the Spaceflight Now love. And that's really great to see. I love the community that we're building here, and so glad you're all able to be a part of it this evening as we get ready for heading into the Christmas holiday season just around the corner. We'll be here before you know it. So turning to the weather, it has been quite unpleasant from a launch perspective for much of the past week. As I mentioned, it's been nearly 12 days since SpaceX has launched, and the weather playing no small part in that. Coming into tonight's launch attempt, the 45th Weather Squadron forecast 60% favorable odds of good weather for liftoff during the window. That said, the primary concern for tonight are the liftoff winds. They're also watching the booster recovery weather, which they peg between low and moderate levels, which is, of course, not the most ideal for a launch. We'll continue to keep an eye on that and see if that will potentially interfere with a launch this evening. If SpaceX does pivot to their 24-hour backup opportunity, the weather outlook doesn't degrade, doesn't improve. It's basically the same. 60% favorable at liftoff, with the liftoff winds being the concern and the booster recovery weather being exactly as previously stated. Now T minus 50 minutes, 41 seconds and counting. Taking a quick tour around the weather map there, just briefly. As we continue to step through the countdown, let's go ahead and take a look at the countdown timeline and what we are anticipating this evening. T minus 38 minutes, the point at which the launch director will verify the go, no go poll results. If that go ahead is given, then we start with pellet load at T minus 35 minutes, beginning with both RP1 or rocket grade kerosene being loaded onto the first and second stages of the Falcon 9, as well as liquid oxygen being loaded on board the first stage. And at T minus 16 minutes is LOX loading for the second stage of the Falcon 9. Before that, though, we'll see the so-called big vent from the strong back, the launch pad. Happens as the feed lines are chilled. Then at T minus 7 minutes, the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines gets underway. It involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and the turbo pumps, and it's important because it helps protect the engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. About 6 minutes before liftoff, the first stage kerosene tank should be full. Then at T minus 4.5 minutes, the strong back retract sequence begins. It starts with the clamp arms underneath the payload fairings opening up. Then the transporter erector or the strong back reclines about 1.5 degrees away from the rocket, stays there until liftoff, at which point the strong back pulls away much more quickly to clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9. Then about 2 minutes out, liquid oxygen loading should be wrapped up. At that point, the Falcon 9 rocket will be fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, the control of the countdown will be handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers. The tanks will be brought up to flight pressure. Then 45 seconds out, the launch director will verify the go for launch. The engine ignition sequence is issued at T minus 3 seconds. And if all 9 engines are healthy and ignite, the flight computer will give the command for the hold down clamps to release the Falcon 9 at T0 again, currently targeting that T0 liftoff time at 11:01 p.m. Eastern, 04:01 UTC. Count currently stands at T minus 47 minutes, 30 seconds and counting. Just a little less than 10 minutes away from the point at which the launch director will make that call on the startup propellant load. Now T minus 46 minutes, 3 seconds and counting. I want to thank our friend Chuck Briggs for helping us with tracking views tonight, taking a look from his camera over at the Falcon 9 rocket. And you see the crew access tower standing beside it. Still apparently TBD at this point if in fact Axiom Space and SpaceX will be using this pad in support of the AX-3 mission to the International Space Station. We're anticipating a decision to be made on that later this month, although there's not a whole heck of a lot of time between now and when the mission is supposed to launch. And if for some reason pad 40 isn't available, there's a bit of a traffic jam over on pad 39A. Taking a live look over at historic Launch Complex 39A, the transporter erector back out of the pad, devoid of a rocket, though, for now. SpaceX has said they are targeting now December 28th for the launch of the Falcon Heavy rocket supporting the USSF 52 mission. That's sending up the payload of the X-37B orbital test vehicle, or OTV. That space plane, of course, was supposed to launch earlier this month, and they had to stand down for a number of issues that they are working through, now targeting liftoff just a few days after the Christmas holiday, before the New Year's holiday. The trickiness comes in on the other side of that launch, though, in turning the pad back over from a Falcon Heavy configuration into one that would support a Falcon 9 rocket. Takes about 3 weeks, sometimes a little bit less, to make that conversion. And at present, Intuitive Machines is targeting launch during its window, which runs from the 12th of January through the 16th. Problem is, though, that they only have those few days since they are launching their Nova C lander to the moon's south pole. And if they aren't able to make the launch during that window, they would have to stand down, presumably to a February timeframe, which could, depending on the timing of things, clash with the Crew 8 mission to the International Space Station, that quartet of astronauts and one cosmonaut, which would likely take priority over the IM mission. And as I mentioned, if Axiom Space is not able to launch off of pad 40, as is still a possibility, then conceivably Axiom would need to come over to pad 39A first before they launch the Crew 8 mission the following month. So, as we talked about during our news from the press site live stream last week, thank you again to those who have watched it. If not, it's up on the channel for you to check out. We'll be coming back in full force next year in January with weekly episodes, so be sure to keep your eye out for that. But we talked about the logjam over at 39A, so certainly something to keep an eye on as the weeks go by, and we'll bring you updates as we learn them. T minus 41 minutes, 44 seconds and counting. T minus 40 minutes, 47 seconds and counting. We're just a couple of minutes away from the launch director making that call on the startup propel mode. And as we wait, want to thank a couple of folks for their support. Kellen526 joining us once again this evening. How are you, sir? With a couple of $5 super chats, one with my favorite corgi and the kimono emoji. Appreciate that, Kellen. And one with a little Santa emoji. Love that. And Larry Mask joining us with channel membership this evening. Thank you so much, Larry. Really appreciate you joining us in channel membership. Now T minus 39 minutes, 20 seconds and counting. Did hear word from SpaceX. They say all systems looking good and weather currently favorable for tonight's launch, sending up those 23 Starlink satellites. So that is certainly a good indication. Of course, as previously mentioned, the booster recovery weather may be a watch item as well. So we'll have to keep an eye out for that. But as of this point in time, so far, so good. So in less than 4 minutes, fueling will begin. It's coming up again at T minus 35 minutes, loading up both RP1 or that rocket grade kerosene as well as liquid oxygen onto the Falcon 9. Now T minus 37 minutes, 37 seconds and counting. As we are approaching the start of propellant load, let's go ahead and talk about where this Falcon 9 is going to be heading once it does lift off from the pad. Let's talk a little trajectory, shall we? Falcon 9, of course, will lift off from the pad at Slick 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. As is the case with all the Group 6 or the sixth shell of the Starlink constellation, will fly in a southeast trajectory toward the Caribbean. Following stage separation, the first stage will land on one of SpaceX's 3 drone ships. On deck tonight is a shortfall of gravitas. The upper stage will continue on with the Starlink satellites, and the fairing halves will jettison just a bit downrange of this map as well. SpaceX poised to use one of its 2 East Coast-based recovery ships to scoop up the fairing halves. Tonight they're using Bob. It and the other recovery vessel, Doug, were named after former NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley. Of course, the pair that famously flew aboard the Demo 2 mission back in May of 2020. Hard to believe we're already almost coming up on the 4th anniversary of the Demo 2 mission. Just a few months away now. T minus 36 minutes and counting. Just a minute away from the start of propellant load. T minus 34 minutes, 49 seconds and counting. Propellant load now underway on the Falcon 9 rocket, both RP-1 flowing into the first and second stages of the vehicle, LOX loading on the first stage of the Falcon 9. Before we continue on, I want to thank Callistia Lee, one of our channel members, for again gifting another 10 Spaceflight Now memberships. That is exceedingly generous of you, Callistia. Thank you so much. Those going to Don Moser, Lisa Cisneros, Per Prof Wannabe, Event 101, Kova, Marty Baldwin, The Moto Lab, Florida Mama Bear, James Dickinson, and Margin Walker, all getting channel membership courtesy of Callistia Lee. So if you haven't already in the live chat, please be sure to thank her and enjoy the perks of channel membership. Those include, of course, access to 4K live views of this and all the missions that launch from the Cape, as well as discounts at our online shop, shop.spaceflightnow.com. And access to member-only videos. And I'd be remiss if I went any further without thanking our wonderful moderators in the live chat, helping to keep things kosher. So appreciate all of you guys who are able to be with us tonight. Astro Joe, Stephanie B, I know I saw you pop in there earlier today or earlier during the broadcast. Good to see you both on board. And our thanks to Richard Cochran for a 10-pound super chat. Really appreciate that, Richard. Thanks for the support. Says something extra special about a night launch. I would have to agree. I know Michael's working on some cool launch photography for this one. So again, be sure to check out his page on X, or you can follow Spaceflight Now as well for launch photography post liftoff. Now T minus 32 minutes, 21 seconds and counting. No T minus 30 minutes, 41 seconds and counting. As you can see on the Falcon 9 rocket, just beneath the SpaceX logo, starting to see that vapor ring forming. Good indication that fueling is in fact underway. And you can see a little bit of wisps of the vapor, as it is not quite as prominent as we see it on other nights, since it is a little bit cooler in Central Florida today. But that fueling does mean SpaceX is committing to that 11:01 p.m. Eastern Standard Time liftoff opportunity. If for whatever reason SpaceX is not able to launch at that time, they will have to stand down 24 hours and wait for the backup tomorrow evening. But at this singular point in time, all indications are that we are in a good position for a launch tonight. So we will continue to hold good hopes that that is in fact the case. Now T minus 29 minutes, 29 seconds and counting. Now T minus 28 minutes, 38 seconds and counting. At this point, also helium loading is now underway into the pressure vessels on the Falcon 9's first stage. Helium is important because it's used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. And as we get ready to see this Falcon 9 rocket launch in just a little over 28 minutes, if all continues to stay on track, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about this booster's history. This won't take very long, as this booster is relatively young compared to some of the others in SpaceX's fleet. This is booster tail number 1081, going for its third flight tonight, supporting the Starlink 6-34 mission. Its first flight was over on pad 39A. That was back on August 26th, 2023, when it supported the launch of the 4-member Crew 7 mission not too long ago, heading up to the International Space Station. That mission was commanded by NASA astronaut Jasmine Moghbeli and featured the first commercial crew launch where all 4 members were representing different countries. That quartet still on station, preparing for a handover with Crew 8 coming up in February, and then they will depart the orbiting outpost, come back down to Earth. And the second and final launch for this rocket was just 39 days ago on November 10th. This was a launch of a cargo Dragon spacecraft, also heading up to the ISS. We are expecting this booster, or excuse me, this cargo Dragon spacecraft to undock eventually, but with all the mercurial weather around the state of Florida, NASA and SpaceX have been continuously pushing off the undocking and return of this spacecraft. Currently, they're looking at Wednesday for the earliest departure time for the cargo Dragon. They've had to adjust that multiple times, and we'll see if Wednesday is good enough to return the vehicle. TBD on that. And that is the extent of this booster's history. It's a short one, as I mentioned, going for its third flight tonight. That's coming up T minus 25 minutes, 55 seconds and counting. And in just about a minute, a little bit less, we'll see the helium loading onto the storage tanks for the second stage will begin. It's coming up at T minus 25 minutes. Now T minus 24 minutes, 16 seconds and counting. Before we hit the big event, let's go ahead and talk about the Falcon 9 rocket itself. Falcon 9 stands tall at 70 meters or 229 feet, has a diameter of 3.66 meters or 12 feet, most of it made up by the first stage. Again, this is booster tail number 1081 in the SpaceX fleet. It has flown twice, going for its third flight tonight. At the base of the first stage are the 9 Merlin engines, which burn rocket-grade kerosene and liquid oxygen that we've been talking about, and produce 1.7 million pounds of thrust. Around the engine compartment are the black carbon fiber landing legs that are used to land the first stage on the drone ship. Again, they're using the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas tonight, standing ready and waiting. Above the first stage is the inner stage. It's a composite structure which consists of an aluminum honeycomb core surrounded by carbon fiber. In that image on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see the deployable hypersonic grid fins. These titanium winglets provide stability and steering for the Falcon 9 as it comes back down through the atmosphere, tail first, like a big old dart towards the drone ship. At the top of the inner stage are 3 mechanical latches that attach to the second stage. First stage main engine cutoff, high pressure helium is used to release those latches, and 4 pneumatic pushers ensure a clean separation. Second stage engine nozzle is also housed safely inside the inner stage adapter until stage separation. Speaking of that second stage, the upper stage, the Falcon 9, powered by a single modified Merlin engine called a Merlin vacuum engine or an MVAC engine. It's equipped with a large nozzle, which is optimized for burns in the vacuum of space, hence the name. It produces more than 200,000 pounds of thrust and will be fired twice on today's flight, placing the 23 Starlink satellites into their intended orbit. The MVAC engine burns the same propellant mix, RP1 and LOX, same as the first stage. It will ignite a third time after the deployment of the Starlink satellites. That deorbit burn helps drive the upper stage back into the atmosphere where it will burn up, helping to eliminate the risk of any unnecessary space debris on this mission. And finally, at the very top of the rocket are the payload fairings housing the 23 Starlink satellites. The fairings are made up of a carbon composite material. They're 13.1 meters or 43 feet tall and 5.2 meters or 17.1 feet in diameter. The two halves of the payload fairing are going to be recovered a little further downrange from where the first stage lands on the drone ship. They splash down gently under parachutes. And as previously mentioned, Bob, the recovery ship, will fish them out of the water and return them to Cape Canaveral for refurbishment and further reuse. That fairing recovery program first begun initially back in 2017 as an experimental state and then brought into more of a regular rotation just a few years later. And now it's become standard operating procedure for SpaceX to recover those fairing halves. And like with the first stage booster, they will go through diagnostic process and assess them for further reflight. Right now, the main missions that don't use reflown fairings are national security space launch missions, although that is currently being studied by Space Systems Command. That is something that will likely come into practice in the years to come, but something that is still under consideration as of right now. Now T minus 19 minutes, 51 seconds and counting. See the big vent underway as those feed lines are being chilled in preparation for LOX loading on the second stage coming up T minus 16 minutes. These good views from our friend Chuck Briggs. I want to say thank you to the more than 6,600 of you that are joining us this evening. First off, welcome. Appreciate you spending a part of your week with us. If you haven't already, if you would be so kind as to hit the like button, that helps the YouTube algorithm do its thing and allows more folks to find this live coverage as we get into the last 19 minutes of the count. T minus 16 minutes is counting. Big vent is wrapped up and liquid oxygen loading onto the second stage of the Falcon 9 has begun. This was the last step in fueling that had yet to begin, now currently underway. Now T minus 15 minutes, 9 seconds and counting. Want to welcome Leanna Champion to channel membership at the pad leader level. Really appreciate that, Leanna. She, like our other channel members, now has access to those 4K live views for this and other launches from the Cape, discounts at the online shop, shop.spacelightnow.com, and access to member-only videos. Thanks for the support. No, T minus 13 minutes, 29 seconds and counting. As we approach final 13 minutes of the count, let's go ahead and step through the launch timeline, let you know what to expect as we get ready for liftoff, hopefully coming up just after the top of the hour. Again, T0 targeting liftoff at 11:01 p.m. Eastern, 04:01 UTC. The rocket will pass through the greatest point of aerodynamic pressure, otherwise known as max Q, at T plus 1 minute 12 seconds. Then at T plus 2 minutes 30 seconds, we'll see first stage main engine cutoff, or MECO, where the 9 Merlin engines will cease firing, setting up stage separation at T plus 2 minutes 34 seconds, followed quickly by the second stage engine ignition, or SES1, when that Merlin vacuum engine ignites. Payload fairings will jettison at T plus 3 minutes 10 seconds. They'll splash down in the Atlantic, again, to be recovered by the vessel Bob. Then at T plus 6 minutes 14 seconds, the first stage entry burn begins. That'll last 18 seconds, followed up by the first stage landing burn, getting ready to touch down on the drone ship. Begins at T plus 8 minutes 6 seconds. Touchdown expected at T plus 8 minutes 28 seconds. Then at T plus 8 minutes 44 seconds, the second stage engine will cut off, otherwise known as SECO 1. Falcon 9 upper stage will remain in a coast phase until T plus 54 minutes 9 seconds, when that Merlin vacuum engine will reignite for a brief 2-second burn, setting up for payload deployment when the 23 Starlink satellites will be released at T plus 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 27 seconds. As currently stand, it's T minus 11 minutes, 15 seconds to lift off. T minus 9 minutes, 37 seconds and counting. About 2.5 minutes away from the engine chill down sequence that's coming up T minus 7 minutes. Before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about the payload on board, the 23 Starlink satellites. You see a file photo of what those look like when they're stacked in launch configuration. This photo was taken before another Starlink launch. Tonight, poised to be the 41st launch of these V2 minis to date. This will also be the 61st Starlink launch of 2023. Each of these satellites weighs about 1,760 pounds or 800 kilograms. After the solar panels unfurl, they have a wingspan of about 100 feet or 30 meters. They use argon hull thrusters for in-orbit maneuvers, and they were built in Redmond, Washington, which is near Seattle. Of course, to date, SpaceX still hasn't published a rendering or a photo of what the V2 minis look like in their operating configuration, but we do have this photo taken by the Australian company HEO Robotics using one of its satellites, and claimed this was the first direct observation of a Starlink V2 Mini on orbit. A little bit grainy, but here you can see the two solar panels extending from the main body of the satellite. T-minus 8 minutes, 10 seconds and counting. Just a little over 30 seconds now from the engine chill down sequence. Starlink V2 minis were developed as a holdover before the version 2 full-size satellites could be launched using SpaceX's Starship vehicle, currently in preparations for its third integrated flight test over in Starbase near Boca Chica Beach in South Texas. Here are some of the differences, though, between the version 1.5 satellites and the V2 minis currently flying. These have 4 times the capacity of their predecessors. They introduced E-band for backhaul. They featured upgraded phased array antennas. They are 2.6 times heavier than the version 1.5 satellites. And they also use argon hull thrusters, replacing the previously used krypton thrusters. Here's an image of what they look like when they're firing for reference. SpaceX currently has more than 2 million Starlink internet customers around the world, available in more than 60 countries across all 7 continents. This is a map of SpaceX's coverage currently. The light blue areas have coverage now, and the darker shades are a combination of waitlisted and coming soon countries. T-minus 6 minutes, 3 seconds and counting. About a minute and a half away from the strong back retract sequence beginning. Just before then, though, we should be getting some mission audio from SpaceX. So just as a heads up, before we get to that point, if you do hear us pause, that is so that we are not talking over the mission audio loops. I want to be able to allow you to hear what we are hearing, and we're not conflicting with one another. As we get ready for that, excuse me, want to welcome a couple other folks to channel membership, MS, as well as a little tech joining us both at the pad leader level. Really appreciate the support from you both. Welcome to channel membership. Also want to thank DH for a $7 YouTube super chat. Thank you so much, DH. Asks to give a shout out to Lee H, who is watching from Ontario, Canada. Go SpaceX. Happy to oblige. Hello, Lee H. Hope things are going well up north in our northern neighbors, Canada. Hello to you in Ontario. And once again, thanks to channel member Callistia Lee for another $10 super chat. Thank you so much, Callistia, and stand by that comment. Just remember to hit the like/thumbs up button, and that would be a big help. We are now in the final 5 minutes, and we heard that call from SpaceX that the strong back retract sequence is beginning. So to the 15,000 plus of you who are with us live, hit the like button, allow some more folks to join us this evening. That would be fabulous. You see the clamp arm starting to open up just beneath the payload fairings there on the Falcon 9 rocket. Just as another bit of housekeeping, if you notice our countdown clock in the upper right-hand corner is slightly ahead of the time you see on SpaceX's feed, the bottom center of your screen. It's because our countdown clock is in real time. SpaceX is on a slight delay. their feed. We will be making the call outs in real time. As we come into the last few minutes of the count, I want to thank a couple more folks for their support this evening. Bruce Melville with a a $2 super chat donation. Really appreciate that, Bruce. Thank you so much. And to Stephen Ross for a very generous $20 super chat with a simple message, 50. Not entirely sure what the 50 is in reference to, but thank you so much, Stephen, for your support. And to Nelson Reyes for joining us once again, as he often does. Good to see you again, sir. Says, thanks again for the great coverage. Thank you, Nelson, for helping support it, make this possible. Now,
Stage 1 LOX load is complete.
T minus 2 minutes, 38 seconds and counting, or that call out for stage 1 LOX loaded complete. Last fueling call we'll hear is stage 2 LOX load coming up in less than a minute. At which point the Falcon 9 rocket will be fully fueled with 1 million pounds of propellant.
Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
And then we hear that call out for stage 2 LOX loaded complete. Falcon 9 is fully fueled and just in top off. We're now a minute and a half away from scheduled liftoff.
Ground gas closeouts.
And the venting you're seeing is what you just heard that call out for, the ground gas closeouts. One of the final steps before they get ready for liftoff. Now just a little over a minute away. Very briefly, but very sincerely, want to thank David DeJesus for a $2 super chat. Pinfinity for a $10 super chat says space.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
Happy to Livia for a $10 super chat. And Mitchell for a $20 super chat, saying shout out to Madison and Logan watching in Cocoa Beach. We'll come back to some other donations in just a moment. We are approaching the final 30 seconds now. We did hear the call out that they are go for launch. Liftoff coming up, 20 seconds. 15 seconds. And here we go. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition. And liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket, launching the Starlink 6-34 mission. The Falcon 9 has cleared the tower. After nearly 12 days of Falcon 9 rocket, now lifting off from the U.S. Now coming up on 30 seconds into launch, getting some great tracking views from Chuck Briggs this evening. Also have support from Pete Carsons with Max Q Productions. And this view coming from our own Michael Kane here at the press site. A little over 47 seconds into flight. Listen to the roar of the 9 Merlin engines. Coming up on a minute now, the Merlin engines should be throttling down as the vehicle approaches max Q. That call you just heard, meaning the vehicle traveling faster than the speed of sound. I hear that call out for max Q. These views right now from Michael here at the press site. Now about a minute and a half into flight, less than 1 minute left on the burn of the first stage. These Merlin engines producing 1.7 million pounds of thrust. Tracking views from Chuck Briggs' camera. Pete Carson's now. That call for MVAC chill down. They're thermally conditioning the second stage Merlin engine for ignition. Now 2 minutes into flight, we're approaching main engine cutoff or MECO. Again, those 9 Merlin engines will shut down, followed by stage separation and ignition of the upper stage, that Merlin vacuum engine. We'll see the payload fairings jettison shortly thereafter. They'll be recovered by Bob tonight. Getting some great views from Pete's camera here. Now 2.5 minutes into flight. MECO. Stage separation. And second stage engine ignition. And there you see stage separation in the delayed SpaceX view. And things moving well. Now a little over 3 minutes into flight. Should see those payload fairings jettison in just a few moments here. We'll see them first on the image on the left-hand side, coming from Pete's camera. There you see those payload fairings falling away right now, glinting against the glow of the Merlin vacuum engine. And there's fairing separation on the SpaceX delay. Those Starlink satellites now exposed to the vacuum of space for the first time. Now T plus 3 minutes, 34 seconds and counting into flight. You can still see those payload fairings on the far left-hand side of your screen just glinting away. Love that. Coming up, the next milestone is that entry burn beginning.
Both vehicles are on a nominal trajectory.
That first stage entry burn coming up at T plus 6 minutes, 14 seconds. The last 18 seconds until T plus 6 minutes, 32 seconds. Seeing some stars whisk by as continue to see tracking views on Pete's camera here. It is a mostly clear night here on the Space Coast, so we're getting some excellent tracking views from Michael, Chuck, and Pete tonight. Now coming up on 5 minutes into flight for the Starlink 6-34 mission. We're now just about a minute away from that first stage entry burn beginning.
Both vehicles continuing to follow a nominal trajectory.
We hear that call out that both the upper stage and first stage of the Falcon 9 following along their intended flight paths. Good news as this mission continues on. And we're getting tracking views now from Michael's camera here at the press site. We're setting up to capture that entry burn beginning in about 4 seconds. Bring you those views if we can see them. And then we see that entry burn beginning. Captured by Pete Carson's camera. We'll see the SpaceX view. Start on the right-hand side of your screen. There's the end of that entry burn in real time. We'll see if we're still a few seconds more on the SpaceX delay.
Stage 1 entry burn shut down.
Stage 2 FTSO saved.
There was the end of the entry burn for now, coming up at T plus 8 minutes and
Both
6
stages
seconds
are on a nominal trajectory.
is when the landing burn will begin. That's coming up in now less than a minute. And just so you're not having to do some timekeeping math in your head, we do have our
Stage 1 transonic.
call up for stage 1 being transonic, now traveling slower than the speed of sound. Just a few seconds away from the start of the landing burn. Fortunately, it's low enough on the horizon that we won't be able to see it with our tracking cameras. We'll use the SpaceX feed for this portion. There we go. Landing burn now underway. See views from the drone ship there on the right-hand side.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy.
And touchdown of the Falcon 9 first stage booster, tail number 1081. Successfully going up, successfully coming back down, completing its third flight to date.
MVAC shut down.
And you hear the call that the Merlin vacuum engine now ceasing its firing, setting up for a coast phase.
Nominal park orbit insertion.
And that parking orbit will continue on until T plus 54 minutes, 9 seconds, at which point the Merlin vacuum engine will fire for 2 seconds, setting up for Starlink deployment coming up in T plus 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 27 seconds. So it took nearly 12 days to get SpaceX back into the groove of launching, but they are now back in action yet again. With the successful liftoff of the Starlink 6-34 mission. We're taking a look at the pad there now. Fortunately, devoid of its Falcon 9 rocket, which means SpaceX can continue on with its manifest. Before we go ahead and close out this evening with our look at the mission stats, want to go ahead and thank a few more folks who helped support our coverage this evening, help make this all possible. Our thanks to Peppa for a $2 super chat. It says, "Yee-hoo, rocket ship, giddy up." And fortunately, it did in fact giddy on up and out of here. Callistia Lee with one last $10 super chat donation this evening. Really appreciate all the support tonight, Callistia. This beautiful view from Port St. Lucie tonight, and awesome coverage as always. Well, thank you for saying that. Really appreciate you helping make this possible. Roseanne DeVasto with a very generous $50 super chat says, truly real time, OMG ground shaking, windows rattling, no words for the solar plexus rumble. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate that. Very generous of you, Roseanne. Thank you. Also to Rob G, $5 super chat. There's another great launch. Me and my son Robert got to see it very clear here in Miami. Thank you. Excellent. Glad there wasn't obstructive cloud cover for you there, Rob. And Peppa once again with a $5 super chat says, golly old girl sure was a squealing with love from KFC. Thanks, Spaceflight Now. Thanks, Peppa. Thanks for the kind words and for the support this evening. And with that, let's go ahead and take a look at the mission stats for this evening, where things all panned out. This was the third flight of Falcon 9 booster 1081. This was the 282nd Falcon 9 launch to date, the 88th Falcon 9 launch of 2023. This was SpaceX's 226th Falcon booster reflight, or the launch of a booster that has flown at least once. This was SpaceX's 92nd orbital launch of 2023, their 94th orbital launch in the last 365 days. This was the 160th SpaceX orbital launch from Pad 40, the 215th orbital launch from this pad, and launch number 69 from Cape Canaveral in 2023, speaking for both Cape Canaveral Space Force Station as well as NASA's Kennedy Space Center. One last graphical view of where SpaceX is as we come to the nearly the end of 2023. More than 30 launches more at this point in the year than they did in all of 2022. And they still have at least a handful left on their docket for the rest of this month. I believe there are a couple coming up at the end of this week on Friday. One from Vandenberg Space Force Base, a couple of Sarah satellites, as well as potentially another Starlink mission targeting the end of the day right here at the Cape. And with that, I want to thank just a few more folks for their support this evening before we thank our crew and bid you adieu. Callistia Lee, once again, with a $10 super chat donation. Thank you so much, Callistia. Says, thank you, Will, and all the staff and mods. And yes, big ups to all of our moderators in the live chat. Says, I'm happy to support y'all. Best coverage and community. And I wholeheartedly agree that we have a wonderful Spaceflight Now community. And our thanks to Gary Yost for gifting a Spaceflight Now membership. That going to D-Rec. So, D-Rec, welcome to channel membership. If you haven't already, please thank Gary in the live chat. And just doing one last sweep, make sure I haven't missed anyone. John Cave with a $2 super chat. And I believe that will do it. And as we close out, if you want to continue tracking things on a rocketry front over on Launchpad Live, we do have views courtesy of our friends over at Lab Padre of Starbase as they are preparing to lift another booster, a super heavy booster, in preparation for testing on the road to the third integrated flight test of the Starship vehicle. This is booster 10. And if you happen to notice, Elon Musk tweet earlier, I believe it was earlier today, Ship 28 is also out near the pad getting ready for its testing. So things moving along quite nicely with some festive transports in the theme of the Christmas holiday over at Starbase. So again, if you want to continue tracking the lifting of this booster, that'll be over on Launchpad Live after the stream ends. And that'll go ahead and do it for us on a Monday night, the last Monday before Christmas. Want to thank Chuck Briggs and Pete Carsons with Max Key Productions for their help with tracking this evening. Our thanks to all the wonderful moderators in the live chat for helping to keep things moving and copacetic with everybody. Kudos to Michael Kane for helping us with tracking at the press site, as well as some launch photography. Again, you can see that over on his profile on X. For Stephen Young providing the technical support for this launch broadcast tonight. I'm Will Robinson Smith. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, thanks so much for spending part of your evening with us or morning, wherever you may be. Sure to be good to yourself, be good to others, and we will see you next time.